You're listening to an episode recorded during the time Innovation Fuel was part of University Canada West. We are proud and grateful for the work we've done together, and we want to thank the university for being in our podcast. We are now excited to continue the journey of Innovation Fuel into its next chapter. Thanks for listening. Welcome to another episode of Innovation Fuel. I am Dave Kiran.
And I am Gelare Farhadian. We are educators and your hosts.
Innovation Fuel is a weekly podcast that brings you ideas from businesses, both entrepreneurs and industry professionals. And we bring those ideas into the classroom so that students can engage and see if they can help solve some of these problems in and around BC.
We have explored diverse business models, leadership issues, and how entrepreneurs are innovating and adapting to our current environment.
If you want to learn more about what we talked about so far, check out our episodes at www.ucanwest.ca/innovationfuel.
Now, without further ado, let's ignite today's episode of Innovation Fuel.
Okay, Glory, today, one of the things that is always a challenge for businesses as they're getting started, and even I think more towards the leadership piece, is the balance between coaching and mentorship, and understanding that piece. There is quite a bit of a divide between both, eh?
Yeah, but I really don't know. Don't ask me that. But I have to tell you that is when you look at the MBA graduate, they are going to be in the managerial or supervisory level, right? So one piece that they have to have it's a leadership skills. How to deal with the people, how to influence them, how to motivate them, how to communicate with them. And all of that, it's a part of the leadership skills. And you cannot take these skills out of the management part. All the managers need that skills because they are dealing with people. And this is one of the very important aspects of MBA or business courses, business programs in general.
And it's a crucial part too, because I think more and more with in adaptation of technology, we're having technology that's controlling a lot of the things that humans can, maybe don't need as much input on, but there's still the humanistic piece here. It's the development piece. It's the skills that, and how do you, get the most out of the people that are coming to you, and how do we support them in conjunction with what you're trying to achieve?
Exactly. And then more people are getting more expert or specialized in their field. So those people are more difficult to lead, because they have their own identity, they have their own expertise, so they have their voice, and that is very difficult sometimes to lead them and show their vision. But as it's most of the people are managers that can be leaders. So that part is maybe this is the time that we ask for some coach come and help us and give the skills or take the leadership out of us and help us to be leader. So that's why we asked the Gervès-Keen come here and talk about the leadership coach or executive coach. Hello, Jennifer. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Hi, Jennifer. Great to have you on our show, Innovation Fuel. So, Jennifer, we always like to ask our guests a little bit about them and their backstory, because we really want you to connect to our audience and understand, and so they can see who you are in this COVID times. But tell us a little bit about your backstory. How did you end up where you are today?
That would take longer than 90 minutes. Essentially, I have done a lot of things in my career. I basically went at it with the perspective of I'd do something until I didn't like it anymore, and then I would change. I grew up in a very interesting environment. My dad was a mining engineer, and he was a international specialist in Arctic mining. So lived all over this country, across the Arctic Circle, in Greenland, moved a ton when I was a kid. And the reason that's important is that it instilled a certain level of adaptability, ease with change, resilience that is definitely part of who I am today as a professional. My first job was actually in politics, which is such a great petri dish for human behavior and so many great lessons on what you don't want to do. And early on in my career, it was hugely illuminating because at the age of 23, 24, after getting my first degree, it was like, oh, look, that's it. No, no. So it was a huge learning curve. I learned how to deal with the media. I learned how to make tough decisions. I was the second signing authority on all the expenses at the age of 23. I ran the budget because my boss wasn't interested in it. So I had to tell these 50-year-old politicians that no, that expense was not okay. And so it was a huge, huge foundational piece in sort of, who I am and what mattered to me. From there, I sort of crossed over and moved into a government role in communications, which I did for about 6 months. You'll see a theme in my life. I get bored very easily. So after about 6 months, it was like, okay, now what? And my contract was coming up, and they offered me a full-time job, and I went home and flipped a coin, and heads it was Paris, and tails it was Barcelona, because those were my favorite two cities. And Paris won. So I was 24, 25, sold everything I owned, didn't speak the language, had BC high school French, and I went to really bad high schools. So it was, I could conjugate irregular verbs, but I could not make a sentence to save my life. Landed in Paris with no place to live, no job, no language, no nothing, and basically built my life over. And ended up getting into teaching English because of my political background, because it's the only thing I could do. Because of my political background, I ended up working primarily with executives. Then I got into like the business communication, business negotiation side of things because I had that background. And it sort of went up from there. And I worked in manufacturing. I worked in press. I worked for the Wall Street Journal for a year. I did some crazy stuff, which you can only do really in foreign countries because it's the language. They'll overlook your lack of skill set because you have the language that they want. And so that opened up some opportunities. And I ended up, my original plan when I finished university, I had failed the Foreign Service exam by 1 point. And I hadn't even really studied for it. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do 2 years in France, 2 years in Spain, 2 years in Italy, come back with 4 languages, take the exam again, and go have this brilliant career in the Canadian Foreign Service. And I did 2 years in France. I met my husband there. I ended up staying there for 12 years. The Foreign Service was not in the plan. And everything sort of had to be rejigged. And I think it's a perfect example of, you can start with a goal, and then stuff happens, and you end up doing something completely different. So stayed in France until 2005. Had my own business there eventually, which is a completely different experience to having a business in Canada. Completely different. And then I came back in 2005. I sponsored my husband in as an immigrant. So we went through the whole starting over again thing again. Because even as a Canadian, being out of the country for 12 years, no network, no, right? So it was starting from zero. And yeah, and then went, had to get a real job. I had to get a real job and to sponsor my husband in. That lasted about 2.5 years, and then I went back out on my own. So yes, I'm not good at being an employee. Let's just put it that way.
I know. I can remember that you told me that as a Canadian, when you apply for a job, the employer told you that you don't have a Canadian experience.
Yes,
that was so impressive.
I was a little fed up at that point. And so my answer to that was I don't have local experience because I haven't been here for 12 years, but I speak 2 languages fluently. I have a master's degree and I have more experience than you're ever going to find here. So what's your problem was basically my answer. And they ended up surprisingly hiring me after I got mad at them. But it's, they sort of thought about it and went, you know what, you have a really valid point. So yeah. So that was that. But it was, and then after doing that for a couple of years, it was a national nonprofit, more of a technical role. I actually got into analyzing data and figuring out better solutions and all this stuff. In the middle of the recession in 2008, they were restructuring, and I was offered one of 3 new roles because they were getting rid of mine. And took the May long weekend to try and convince myself, because at the time I was the only one that had a full-time salary with benefits, because my husband was still building his career back up after starting from zero again, and realized that I didn't want any of them, and decided that it was the moment to go back out on my own and start my business again in the middle of a financial crisis in 2008. Yeah, we're risk takers in our family. Started first year. I think I made $35,000 with a family of 4 in the Lower Mainland in 2005 or 2008, and so and had built it up ever since. So that's sort of the career path. Lots of different things, but I have to say that when I look back, it's really interesting when you have sort of perspective in the rearview mirror, because everything that I did contributes somehow to what I do today. Having worked in so many different industries and being exposed to so many different organizational cultures and roles and sectors, as a coach, I can go into any organization, I don't care what you do, and I can figure it out in 5 minutes. That the business acumen that I built up makes a huge differentiator for me in the marketplace, because a lot of coaches come from an HR background and they don't necessarily have that. But it's that adaptability and being able to go in and just kind of figure it out really quickly that has been an enormous help. So at the time, it really looked like a failure, because every 18 months to 2 years, I wasn't even just changing jobs, I was changing industries. And nothing was ever really sticking. And it was kind of, you sort of slog on and figure you're going to figure it out one day. And my one day showed up when I was about 40. So, for everyone who thinks that you got to figure it out by the time you're 22, nope. Nope.
So, Jennifer, can you help us to understand your job as a coach, executive coach? What does that mean?
So, all right. So we'll start there, because my business has other revenue streams in it. But so my role as an executive coach is basically to work. So my demographic as an executive coach is senior leadership. So I work at the C-suite level. I work with CEOs. I work with VPs. I work with partners in the Big Four. I work at that level primarily. And so my job is literally to help them be a better leader. Sometimes that's about the business. Sometimes it's about the people. But invariably, what I love about coaching and the relationships that you form with your clients is that everything they do to become a better leader, a better business person, more efficient, more effective, more humane, whatever they need to work on at work, invariably spills over into their personal lives. And the amount of times I've been told by clients, by partners of clients, by spouses even once, which really blew me away, about how that person had grown as a human and as a parent and as a partner, a life partner to somebody. It's really amazing when you see how coaching can really help somebody just bring out their best, massage a little bit the edges that aren't working, figure out their communication style so they have a more positive impact. And then that tends to spill out over into their actual lives. So it's a really rewarding role. It covers so many different topics that I don't get bored anymore, because there's always something new. I mean, I help people with everything from figuring out how to market their startup to, to I have to sit down and have a really tough conversation with an employee and I don't know how to do it. To, organizational culture, to figuring out the vision, to like, it just covers every part of the life cycle of an organization. So it's fascinating stuff.
And it's really interesting that, like, because I think some of us might think that coaching is just coaching for the success of the business, but what you kind of alluded to there was the coaching is not only the success of the business, it also taps into the personal piece, and it's an all inclusive element, which is very interesting, I think, and where that fits in the niche. So when you talk about the coaching and when you take on these roles, Jennifer, like how do you determine how long you're going to coach an individual? Is it ongoing? Is it just a small bit of time, or how do you determine that?
It really depends. And so I'm not a classic product of the coaching profession, I would say. So there's things that people do in the coaching profession that I don't. So for example, a lot of coaches will have you commit to a 6-month relationship because a lot of people believe that you can't do anything in less than 6 months. And that the longest should be roughly 9 months, and then you're kind of done. For me, it really depends on the individual. There are individuals that are really almost there. They just need that little bit of a nudge and that encouragement to step into it, and it can happen very fast. Like right, they've already kind of gotten themselves in the mindset that things have to change, and they started to do a little work on themselves, and then the coaching comes along and they can move really quickly. There's other individuals who it's like peeling an onion, and you get to one level and then it's like, oh, look at everything that's here, and then you get to another level. And so I have clients that I've worked with for years, but not continually. So what that relationship looks like is you might be working together fairly intensely, possibly for up to a year. And then it's kind of like kicking the bird out of the nest. They're going to go do their thing. And then as soon as they need something, they call you up. So I have individuals that I've worked with for probably a decade, that I hear from every once in a while, because careers change, lives change, things happen, like pandemics, and people hit speed bumps that they didn't anticipate. And when you already have that relationship, it's really easy to pick up the phone because I know them, I know their culture, I know their organization, and to say, hey, this is what's happening, because it's that external confidential, which is huge, especially for when you're a CEO. There's nowhere else to go, kind of thing. It's an objective space that you can sort of just put something out there, and you get a sounding board, and you get someone asking you a ton of questions that should challenge you and make you think about something a little bit deeper. So it really does depend on the individual. I don't have a cookie cutter formula, and especially the level that I work at. It's just not, you can't sort of predict where these things are going to go necessarily. A lot of companies will say we have budget for 6 months, and great, let's do it for 6 months and see what happens.
And is it the individual that's motivated to go get the coaching, or is it coming from somewhere else? Like, how do they get to that point of saying, I need a coach? And then how do they find you, Jennifer?
So it's really interesting how it's evolved over the last, I would say, probably even 5 years. There's been a really big shift from what I would call remedial coaching, which is you're being brought in to, quote unquote, fix somebody who's not performing or who has a whole bunch of behavioral issues or what have you, to now it's really being seen almost as essential to senior leadership in order just to be able to do your job. And part of that is because leadership has become so much more complex than it used to be. Leadership used to be, you run the business, or you do this, or you do that. And now you literally have to be Yoda. Like, you have to mentor, you have to coach, you have to create a great organizational culture, you have to get results, you have to speak to your board, you have to, right? Like, there's so many layers to it. And so sometimes so we've shifted to the fact that now a coach is actually seen as going from good to great. A coach is seen as being, a partner on your road to leadership that you're probably going to need throughout your career at different points. Like I say, when you hit those speed bumps, or that when you're in transition. And so sometimes it's the organization who recognizes that an individual needs a little bit of support, or they've been trying to support them and they just don't have the skill sets internally or the tools that they can do. So they'll approach the individual and they'll say, hey, we're thinking about getting you some coaching. What do you think? And so it's much more of a collaborative conversation than it used to be. It used to be, you need to have a coach, your performance is slipping, or this is not working, or whatever. And then the person would be told that it had to happen. That still happens sometimes, but for the most part, coaching has evolved and has become more mainstream to the point where most people, especially when they're starting to get into senior leadership, they understand the bonus and the benefit of coaching. Sometimes it is the individual who will stick up their hand and say, hey, I'm struggling, or I need a coach, or I'd like to hit the next level and I'm not sure what's stopping me. So it really can come from either end.
No, I think that it's going to be very difficult to cut. I don't know. It's just, correct me if I'm wrong. As an executive, to listen to someone else and let someone else come in and tell me what to do.
So no coaching works if there isn't trust, and no coaching works if there isn't willingness. What I often find is that the organization has framed it in a certain way. If the individual is reluctant, let's say, they might have framed it as, hey, you need some help, or, and our egos are incredibly fragile. They're like eggshells. And so as soon as someone says, I think you need a coach, you're going to take that as I'm doing things wrong and I'm not as great as I think I am kind of perspective. So it can require a little bit of reframing. What I find is that once I go in and actually talk to the individual and tell them how it works and what they're going to get out of it, which is 100% confidential space that they get to work out their insecurities, the things that they're not entirely sure of, conversations, play out conversations before they go have them to make them more successful. Generally, everybody gets bought in pretty quickly. And there's one executive I worked with who I will never forget, who hardcore finance, black and white, don't give me this people stuff. I get a lot of those. I work a lot with accountants, financials, engineers, people that are very, and that's why I use neuroscience a lot, because people are very sort of, this is all warm and fuzzy sort of things. 3 months in, he looked at me during a conversation and he said, Jen, he's like, this really works. I was like, God, you sound so surprised. And he's like, really? He said, I even had a really good conversation with my wife last night that I've never had before. Like, he was just like, wow. So for me, I always ask people to sort of suspend their disbelief, give us a couple of sessions and then they can tell me that they don't think it's useful. And it's never happened. Like, people never say it's not useful. But I think sometimes you do have to experience it, because everyone takes something different out of the coaching experience. It's why when it really works, I do call it magical. It's getting what you need when you need it, delivered in a way that you can actually do something with it. The idea of coaching is not to have, interminable conversations. It's that at the end of that conversation, something happens. There's an action, there's a behavior, there's a goal, there's a shift, there's something actually happens. And a lot of it is about building their own self-awareness. And then they get really good at actually, I get executives that come back after they've been coaching for a while and they're like, yeah, this happened. And oh my God, I knew what I was doing. I was doing this and this and this. Like, they've already diagnosed it. And so they just have to figure out how to change it,
So after these years that you're working with the executive, what do you think, what's a common mistake for most of them?
I think a common mistake for all of us is that we make an awful lot of assumptions about what other people are thinking. And I think that, when you look at the whole diversity and inclusion conversation right now, for example, we're having a lot of conversations at the executive and organizational level about, bias, subconscious bias, that kind of thing. And that comes from making assumptions about people and what they want and what they think. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that senior leaders make is they don't spend enough time asking people what they really are thinking. There are very few organizations that have upward feedback. Most of them have
Yeah.
downward feedback.
Yeah.
And when I work with the senior executives, they're desperate for feedback. Many of them will say to me, I'm in the most important role of my career, and yet no one's ever going to tell me what they really think about what I'm doing, right? Because
Yeah.
people don't, right? The position scares them. It's very difficult to get honest feedback. And so if your organization doesn't have those upward feedback mechanisms in place, it's really hard for people to understand the impact of their decisions, of how they're communicating. And so, like I said, then we operate under assumption. And things can roll along quite nicely until we actually discover one day that what we're assuming to be true is not. And then they have to rewind and somehow fix something that really wasn't their fault in the first place. But if you're not getting that feedback from individuals, you have no idea how things are actually working.
Yeah, I'm really curious on one thing that you did bring up there, and a couple of things that like it come to mind. Like first thing, the neuroscience thing was really intriguing, and how that plays into it. But I also, one of the things that we talk about in this situation is emotional intelligence, and how that play on emotional intelligence to really try to get to the heart of what some of these individuals are feeling, and be able to bring that back in order to change something.
So the neuroscience piece for me is essential. We got to understand what's going on in our brains, because our brains drive our behavior, right? So I've done a lot of study in that area. I've done a whole bunch of training in that area, and I do find it incredibly useful, as I said earlier, when you're approaching people who work in what I call linear sectors, right? A to B to C to D. It's they want the science, they want the data, and you can actually be so much more persuasive when you're trying to get people to understand the importance of connection and communication. And up until that point, they kind of wrote it off as a not necessary. And the neuroscience helps them understand exactly what that looks like. The emotional intelligence piece, yes, absolutely, totally key. When you look at the skill sets that we're going to need in leadership in the years to come, empathy is right up in the top 5. But so is creativity and curiosity. Those are the things that artificial intelligence will never be able to do at the same level as a human. So we have to cultivate that, and you can't cultivate that if you can't communicate. It's they go hand in hand. That's just how it works.
Jennifer, I just you mentioned about the EQ, but there is a lot of debate about the background of EQ as well. It means that maybe we are overuse it or not use it very well. So, what is your suggestions for students if they want to look at the EQ and their leadership?
So yeah, in terms of emotional intelligence and when you're a student, one of the first things I think that is absolutely crucial is I don't get irritated by much in life, but I think one of my ultimate pet peeves is when people talk about soft skills. I hate that expression. I hate it with a passion. There's nothing soft about them. They are the hardest things to master. The hardest things to master. You can learn technical aspects, you can regurgitate information, you can memorize stuff, but if you cannot communicate, you can be the smartest person in the world. If you don't know how to influence people with your ideas, you will never go beyond your own little cubicle. It's just not going to happen. And so for me, they're not soft skills, they're critical skills. They are absolutely essential. All of the data around emotional intelligence has now shown us that it is actually more important, especially if you're going for a leadership role in your career, than your actual IQ. As I said, you can be the smartest person on the planet, but if you don't know how to communicate and you don't know how to influence and you don't know how to read people, you're going to have a real problem getting anywhere in your career. So I would say you want to make sure that you know it. You want to, and the biggest part of emotional intelligence are 2 aspects: is self-awareness and self-management. Sometimes I have leaders that are like super self-aware, but they don't care to self-manage, so it really doesn't help. So you need to get at both. The one thing that I do caution is if you are an empathetic human being, if you really are connected to people's emotions and you get into their stories with them, a lot of people will tell you that that's a great thing. It is only if you have the levels of self management required to manage it. Empathy, especially when you get into leadership roles and you're responsible for other people, can be exhausting. If you have too much of it and you can't manage it, you're going to carry people's stuff like it's yours all the time. And so there's always a balance. There's always got to be a balance. You're going to make tough decisions about business, they're going to have impact on people. You need to have a balance because if you're overly empathetic, you're going to hang on to people potentially in your team, for example, that probably shouldn't be there anymore because you care about them too much. You don't want to hurt their feelings. And it's a very Canadian trait is that we would rather climb a mountain than have a difficult conversation with somebody. And it's something that really gets in the way of our business success and our productivity. It's like I see that happening over and over and over again. So absolutely self-awareness and self-management, there has to be a balance, especially in business.
Yes, just you remind me that how it's difficult to be, you mean the carry of the people's pain and you have to make a decisions for them. It's very difficult. Yeah, it is. So what one more thing it's one I want to ask is we always say that leadership and management is different because leaders should do the right things, but the managers will do the things right. That's a big difference is going to be. So when you're coaching the executive, how you approach this or attack this part of it and say that you have to do the right things or you how they figured out what's right.
Yeah. It's the world is really complex and that becomes really difficult these days sometimes. I think, we used to have the school of thought where, there's management and there's leadership. And for me, what I'm seeing organizations evolve towards is that if you can't lead, you're not going to be able to manage. The expectations of people now, they don't want managers, they want leaders. They want mentors, they want coaches, they want people that are invested in their career, especially the generation that's coming into the workforce now. And they've all taken leadership in high school. They actually know what leadership is, where 30 years ago you came out of high school and you didn't have a clue, right? So that has evolved a lot. And so I think that as the years go, as we evolve, I think we're going to have a little less of management versus leadership, and it's going to be more management integrated into leadership. And so I think that's part of it. When you get into doing the right thing, which is all about integrity and ethics, I don't necessarily have too much of a problem with that with my clients, mostly because I'm at a position in my business and my career where I get to choose. Um, and I have my own filter, and I won't work with organizations or with clients who I do not feel have, I wouldn't say the right motivation because there's lots of different motivations, but there has to be a willingness to change. And part of my job, especially at the senior leadership level, is to tell the truth. I'm often the one coming in and seeing things. I'm often the one that's calling them out. I'm often the one that's saying, hey, is that really what you wanted to do or say? Or, here's the impact. And I help them sort of play out to the end result of what they're trying to decide. And so generally, I don't work with people who would be unethical or make those sorts of things because I have my own filter of choosing my clients. But there are a lot, and especially right now, there's a lot of decisions to make that are really tough. We have businesses that are trying to figure out what is the best way to survive. And can I pivot? And, I need to lay some people off. And like, there's been some really hard conversations over the last couple of months. And I think that everyone goes into certain things or companies or starts businesses for specific reasons. And you can't, and part of the role of a coach is to remind you of those reasons, right? We get caught up in the day to day, we get caught up in making the money, we get caught up in a lot of things, and we forget what that initial vision, mandate, passion was actually about. And so part of my job is to keep reconnecting them to that, to keep reminding them of, okay, this is what you wanted to create. And sometimes that vision is going to change, and fair enough, but then it needs to be a transparent conversation about what that's actually going to be, you know?
Yeah, it's very, very, very interesting. And one thing that still kind of sits in the back of my mind, Jennifer, and I'm just trying to, and I'm thinking about when we're talking about coaching, we've talked a lot about coaching, but you did mention back earlier in our discussion about mentorship. What is the difference between coaching and mentorship?
So when I train leadership, and when I do a lot of training where I train leaders how to be coaches, not in terms of becoming a coach, but in terms of taking a coach approach with their leadership. I always talk about three leadership muscles, right? We have three muscles. We have managing, we have mentoring, and we have coaching. There's three muscles. The managing is the I'm telling you what to do and how to do it part. It's the performance conversations, it's all that piece, and it's fairly directive. And you use that in situations of crisis, deadline, a new employee. When you know that someone doesn't have the answer, you're probably going to have to manage them a little bit more than what you would coach them. Mentoring is kind of in the middle. If you look at it, it's sort of an arrow with two ends. Mentoring is in the middle. It's giving advice. It's demonstrating your skill set. It's the easiest way to explain the difference between the mentoring and the coaching piece is mentoring is all about the mentor. Mentoring is about the mentor's story. Mentoring is about the mentor sharing that, passing the torch, and it's a very useful thing, and we need to have it in organizations. Coaching is actually really different. Coaching is not about me as the coach. It's not my story. It's not me giving advice. Coaching is all about the person being coached. It's their story. It's their solution. My job as a coach is to ask questions. My job as a mentor is to be asked questions that I answer. It's a completely flip, right? And so in organizations, we get a lot of it. They use the term interchangeably a lot. It's like, oh, we're going to have a mentoring program. We're going to have a coaching. It's completely different. When you coach, you are treating that individual like they are resourceful and capable and that they have the answers and the solutions within them. And your job is to pull them out. When you're mentoring someone, you are recognizing that they don't have the experience. They're going to learn from your experience, and you're going to share a whole bunch of stuff and sort of pass it to them. You're not going to maybe ask a lot of questions, and you're not going to get them to get to their own solution because you're going to be sharing your story as to how you did it, which again is super valuable, completely different.
So, Jennifer, we always like to give our guests the last word. If there's something we didn't cover or we didn't ask you.
The first thing that I would say is around that self-awareness piece. Drive your own career, ask for the feedback, get it. If you're an entrepreneur, get it from your client base. Just really don't be afraid of it, because we grow when we're uncomfortable, and we need to experience and embrace that discomfort to actually get somewhere. That's the first piece. The second piece is, I see a lot of people who are going after promotion, or titles, and they're very focused on the destination and not so much on the journey. And I think, when I look at that, I always think to myself, if the organization is telling you that you're not ready yet, um, or that if you've been there for 6 months and you already want to change, if you move up too quickly, you will have cracks in your foundation. And so my real message, and I think the pandemic has really brought this home, is that we all need to move a little more slowly. There's people that, because of their peers, because of their ambition, because of their expectations, they want to get to wherever it is they want to get to really quickly. If you go too fast without doing the necessary work on yourself, I call it emotional labor, that self-awareness, self-management, all that piece, you're not going to be very successful, because you're going to have all of these holes and all of these gaps. So, take the time to build that foundation, dive into all of this stuff, get curious about things, and then, kind of start building yourself, right? Building block by building block, and just be patient with things. People are trying to hit levels and titles and salaries and things way too early. And I'm seeing the after effects of, they're doing themselves a disservice. They're doing the organization a disservice. It's just right. And so if your goal really is to be that senior leader, take your time, because everything you learn along the way will come and be of service to you at some point.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Well, I think that's all of us seen in our life. That's we sometimes we did the hard work. We didn't see the result in the short term result, but then after a while, you can see that you're using that one in another directions, but you're using that as skills.
And it might not be clear while you're in it. Like I said,
Yeah.
like if you look at my career while I was in it, my early career, it didn't make any sense at all, and nothing lined up. It makes sense when you look back.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you can connect all the dots. And that's, yeah.
Jennifer, these have been some great words of advice. Now, we need to make sure that you get some recognition here too for, if our audience is interested in learning more about you, your business, how can we reach you?
So the website is JGK Online for JGK Consulting. I actually did publish a book last year. So for people that want to learn or just the basics of coaching skills, and it's not even about coaching so much as it's about using coaching skills to be a better communicator. So anyone who is looking at leadership, management, or even just learning how to be a communicator, it's a great resource. I wrote it exactly how I speak, so it's very direct and practical and to the point, and it's short because my leaders don't have a lot of time. So they were all like, if you're writing a book, Jen, make it short. Don't make it a 400-page, 3-hour, tome of an experience. So it only takes about an hour to read, and you can actually buy that from my website. There's a page that says new book that you can get it on. So that would be the easiest way.
Great. Jennifer, it's been an absolute pleasure, a total joy getting to know you and getting to know a little bit about your background, and the knowledge that you just shared is amazing. A lot of our listeners, our students will definitely value from it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed it as well. Thank you, Jennifer, for being here.
For all your business owners out there, we have a fleet of enthusiastic and knowledgeable students here at UCW or University Canada West. They are ready to jump to action. They're ready to help you through our capstone program or through our internship or now virtual internship program. So please reach out to us. If you have a great story or you have a bit of information that you can share to help us all develop and learn from each other, we want to hear from you. So please also reach out to us at www.ucanwest.ca/innovationfuel.
I hope you all enjoyed our conversation today. Turn in next week for a whole new episode.